I did a TEDx talk to 1,100 kids, and the way I explained density to start it was with food. I just said, hey, there's kale and there's cow.
Right.
And they both give me calories.
Only marketers think kale is food, by the way.
Well, okay, we won't go there. But,
Yeah.
And a lot of people have written me and said, kale, couldn't you pick something else?
Yeah.
You know. But no, kale and cow, they're kind of fun. And I threw in ice cream too. But I'd have to eat a whole lot of kale to get the same calories as a piece of steak, just volumetrically, right? And so the density, when you start thinking about density, you can think about it in food terms now.
Chimps chew 8 hours a day.
Yeah, cows chew forever.
Right, exactly. And multiple times with multiple stomachs, right?
Right.
Right, because their food is not dense.
Right.
They do a lot of the work for us, cows.
Right. Now, I happen to think, at least for my body, a mixture of food inputs isn't a bad thing. Okay, I don't have allergies, I'm good. Mm-hmm. So I have vegetables, I have some fruits, I eat meat for sure, and other things, and it's a diverse diet. Think about that like energy. So in density terms, we come back to energy. Energy per unit weight. Things like hay, our first energy ever that our vehicles ate to motor themselves around, and wood, and dung, and other kinds of biomass were the early human-like things used for energy.
And many of the world's poor now.
And still do. We are consuming more of those things than we ever have still, which is ironic. There are more people.
Yep.
So not percentage-wise, but in actual consumption in units, more of those. Now, we start to transition naturally. We discover charcoal or coal. Nature took all the plants and made it into a dense carbon form called coal. Nature did the work. Time, heat, pressure. So now I've got dense plants called coal. And in 1804, the very first commercial steam engine for a train in Wales took its first journey, 1804. And there were 1 billion people in the world in 1804. We'd grown from 110 million in 1000 BC. It was a perfect census back then, we know. They counted them all. 110 million to 1 billion in those thousands of years. And then we went from 1 billion people to 8.3 billion people in a couple hundred years. The hydrocarbon age kicked off. Coal and oil, again, carbon and hydrogen, natural gas, mostly methane, or mostly hydrogen and methane. So this was the accelerator of human development, because now we had an energy source that could do useful work for us, and humans didn't have to labor and toil ourselves or with a plow animal of some kind.
Yeah, I think Bjorn Lomborg has estimated that each of us are served by the equivalent of 40 servants.
At least, in the rich world.
Yeah, in the rich world.
So so think about density. We gone from that. Coal is denser by weight. Oil, denser still. Natural gas by weight, denser still. And then the magic uranium and thorium,
right,
radioactive elements come along, and they have a density per unit weight 1 million times more than wood.
Right.
A million.
1 million times.
1 million times.
Yeah.
So all a nuclear reactor does when you put, I say all, you put little uranium pellets, they're about a centimeter tall. I've held them, that wide, stuff them into these fuel rods.
Yeah.
You activate them, basically you split those things, fission, and that creates a bunch of heat. And those are sitting in a pool of water. The water starts to boil, make steam, turn a turbine, run a generator.
Right.
It's just a different source of heat than burning coal or burning natural gas or burning oil to make electricity. Different source of heat. Right. And by the way, the sun at the towers, that's heat too. All that's doing is boiling water with a bunch of mirrors. So along comes uranium and thorium and nuclear, and this changes things. We can do a tremendous amount of work. I'll give the listeners a feel for that density. In that little uranium pellet, there's enough energy contained in there to the equivalent energy to drive my car from New York to LA back to Dallas. One pellet. Think of the gasoline that would take. A lot. And gasoline is very dense. So you start to extrapolate, this is the energy density certain forms of energy just won the physics game. Uranium and natural gas, basically.
Yeah, well, when you're using vehicles, they have to transport themselves. So anything that's energy dense means that there's much less that
weight.
Isn't useful to transport. Yeah. It's interesting too, on the nuclear side, that we should just take a small detour here before going back to the grid. Well, one of the things that really stymies me, and this is why it's also necessary to think about the story that's being told about such things, is that the banner of war that's flown by the Greens is the carbon dioxide apocalypse narrative. But the best solution to that is clearly nuclear. Clearly. And France has demonstrated that like no other country, I would say. And because nuclear produces zero carbon dioxide. So if that's the enemy, then why would you do anything other than nuclear? But the Greens, as they're doing in Spain, as they already have done in Germany, they're anti-nuclear, which indicates more strongly than anything else that the story is not about carbon dioxide pollution. It's about something else. Now, we can talk a little later about what it might be about, but it's certainly not pro-industry. And the case you just laid out indicates that, well, the Industrial Revolution, 7 billion of the world's people rest on the shoulders of the Industrial Revolution, and that revolution itself is a function of energy density and reliability.
It is.
Right, so that's a first principles story.
That's a first principle. Energy underpins healthy economies, and we'll come to this, healthy economies can afford to invest in the environment.
Yes, right. This is something Lomborg has talked a lot about, right? You get people up above $5,000 a year GDP. They take a long-term view of the future because they're not scrabbling around in the mud wondering where lunch is coming from.
Yes.
Right. So isn't that cool? That's such an optimistic observation.
Oh, it's incredible.
Right? Because if you understand that, then you understand that the proper way forward to a sustainable future, which is hypothetically the goal, is to eradicate impoverishment.
Correct.
Right. So that's great. You'd think the left would jump on that.
Yeah, when we should talk about some of those things, and I've probably been talking about that little triangle for 25 years. Energy, energy, the economy, the environment, and all those investments. The cleanest air in the world, not talking about atmosphere, but the stuff we breathe, particulate matter 2.5, is where it's rich.
Right.
The worst air in the world is where it's poor.
Right.
They just can't afford to clean it up. So this is a fundamental, and it goes that direction: energy, the economy, the environment.
Right.
And ironically, kind of a important point here, if you want to clean up the atmosphere emissions as well as the land, the air, and the water, you have to accelerate economic development. You have to accelerate human flourishing.
Yes.
Not push it down.
Right. You should say that again. And we know this is right. We can see what's happening in Europe because as Germany has rampaged down the idiot green road, their power has become more expensive, more unreliable, and dirtier. Right. They're failing on their own marker of success. As well as failing on the economic front. If you're a degrowth advocate for whatever reasons you might be, that seems like success, but it's just rebranded failure. So we want to reiterate this point so everyone understands. If you actually care about the environment, you want to do everything you possibly can to put people in a situation where they can take a long-term view and take care of everything that's around them. And they can't do that when they're scrabbling around in poverty.